Welcome to Our Girl Relationships. On this channel, we talk about problems people face in their day-to-day life. Let's start with the video.
My 32F sister 43F has been a staple pain in the ass. For as long as I can remember, there has always been tension between the two of us, and I never dared to call our relationship anything other than a passive-aggressive dislike for us to take the shape of a sisterly bond. She's just a very unlikable and unbearable woman, and many people wouldn't disagree. Hopefully, you too will be one of those people by the time you're done reading this. I remember many things that happened throughout growing up with her that make me question her psychological state nowadays. She'd always get herself involved in problems and situations, and she would need someone to get her out of them. It was pretty much the only time we interacted without the bitter passive aggressiveness, and you would think that growing up and maturing would mean she would quit childish and immature behaviors. Sadly, they only got more severe as we both grew up. Somehow we stayed that way. She was being constantly irresponsible and throwing caring after herself on me. I feel pressured and obliged to help her out even when I should prioritize myself. It was very toxic, but it was consistent, and that's the only way of having a sibling that I knew. I went out into the real world and realized that people aren't actually supposed to treat the ones they claim to love so horribly, and began standing up for myself more. That caused my relationship with my sister to fall apart rather abruptly. I can't really say that pleases or contents me. Still, it needed to be done, and I had to find my own version of happiness that doesn't depend on other people and isn't ruined and influenced by my bloody sister. My relationship with my mother is also twisted and sickened by her parent preference towards my sister. It sucks because I'm the one that helped create that image of my sister being the perfect child in my mom's eyes. There wasn't room for me to slip snitching and rattling my sister out to my mom whenever I was being discriminated against for not being like her. Like, dude, I literally made her the version of a daughter that you would love so passionately, so why do I have to be the one suffering the obvious strong sense of dislike? That dislike has directly resulted from my actions. I was never really close to my mother, so it didn't bother me that she didn't pause in her day to ask how I was doing or try to help me out with my struggles as a teenager or ask how my transition into adulthood was. Simply put, we never really had a tight-knit relationship, and I've always been okay with it and would have probably spent the rest of my life chilling with the idea that my mother would most likely hate me if I did anything wrong, and especially if I didn't keep catering to my sister the way I have been my whole life. And that's what brings you the story today. My sister had quite a history with failed marriages and attempts to get married, and by quite a few I mean 3 marriages and 2 engagements, and that is quite impressive because this woman goes through men faster than an alcoholic goes through tiny bottles of scotch. I'm not slut-shaming her or saying that people who struggle to make a relationship work are bad people. Still, my sister definitely fits into that category because they all failed for some reason. That reason was always that she did something severely wrong on her end. She was mostly selfish and careless with all of her partners. I guess one of the many reasons that made them stick with her, despite her apparent toxic behavior, was that she is quite the attractive woman. I'm definitely not saying that the only reason anyone would date her would be because of her looks, but that's also kind of what I'm insinuating, so take it as you will. I was actually putting more time and effort into making her marriages work than she was, even though that's sad and depressing. The people she was married or engaged to were good men with good hearts that tried to make it work with her and failed miserably because she's inconsiderate of the existence of emotions outside her own. At the end of the day, there's only so much I can do. I had just always hoped that having to cut off my entire family and shut everyone out wouldn't be the thing I needed to do to make sure I was even mildly content with my life decisions. Due to my sister's increasing age and approaching and nearing menopause, my mother and lovely sister started to freak out about the possibility that she might not be able to conceive kids of her own. I can kind of see how her having a good relationship with my mother makes her want to have kids of her own so she could suck the life out of them like she did to me. Still, I never thought that would be my problem had my mother not asked me to give her one of my babies out of kindness and generosity. I got married about 2.5 years ago to the love of my life and the man that I love and respect more than anyone on the face of the earth. We're expecting twins because I actually have a twin sister. It's very common in our family to conceive twins. Hence, I was quite restless and excited to tell my mother and sister that I would be carrying on the family legacy of giving birth to twin girls, when my mother's expression switched immediately from excited to hear whatever information I had been anticipating to her plotting something in her head, and it clearly showed on her face. She literally had to sit down to take the information fully in. There was still something inside me that was hoping it was just because she was so excited and happy for me, and not because she actually collapsed at the idea that I would be having a child when my sister is approaching menopause and incapable of conceiving her own kids. She is not married and not open to the idea of having kids without marriage. I guess the reason might be related to the fact that she still lives in the 4th century or some shiz. Everyone's free to make and do whatever they want in their life. Yet my mom started becoming very consistent with her request that I take one of my children and hand it on a silver platter to my sister, simply because she thinks she deserves kids more than I do. She would be more fit to parent, house, and mother a child, but it would be tough for me to raise a single child, let alone handle twins. As you can imagine, my joy and excitement to be around my mother during my pregnancy were being shattered the more time I was forced to spend with her by my husband, who just wanted me to have a good relationship with her and who wants our children to grow up with a grandmother that loves and cares for them. I guess that's not going to be the case unless I agree to take one of my birth children and give it to my sister so both her and my mother can lock up another deal or plot or plan or whatever sick, twisted, psychopathic, controlling image that they have fancy having me in. There's not a doubt in my mind that by me choosing to talk less and less with my family members and pick more arguments with both my mom and my sister whenever they bring up the possibility of me giving them my kid, there's also not a doubt in my mind that this is the best thing that I could be doing for the sake of my own sanity and the safety and well-being of this child, as well as basic human decency. And the reason I'm posting this isn't that I'm actually looking for advice, but rather because I feel like my husband is blindsided by his excellent relationship with his family and is incapable of comprehending that mine is simply unbearable, and would like to have a discussion or a conversation about this with people who actually have families that are as messed up as mine. We can call this trauma bonding, but feel free to tell me all the stories about your upbringing or toxic interactions with your so-called families in the comments. I had my mother ask this from my wife, who rejected her immediately because she knew just how messed up my mom was. So you might have to reconsider talking to your husband about why he is being so stubborn to force you into a relationship that is clearly detrimental to your mental health. I'm sure he is a nice guy and everything, but you shouldn't be forced to interacting with him because he fancies tea parties with his children and mother-in-law. My dad is a toxic alcoholic, and he was probably the reason my mother had a heart attack in her days of youth and passed away when I was a lot younger. Tried convincing me to abort my child because he thought I was unfit to be a mother, even though I had been bothering him ever since my mother passed away. I'm not entirely sure how this story is similar to yours. Still, there are definitely a lot of sick and twisted families. People who have stable relationship with their parents, such as your husband, will never truly understand the depth of emotional trauma that we have to suffer through because of them. My mother-in-law actually tried sneaking into my house a while back and took away our child, but thankfully our neighbor had seen her sneaking in and out, so when we started freaking out and panicking in the morning, he was the first to tell us that we should definitely check with her, as he saw her sneaking out of the house in the middle of the night. And it definitely seemed like an exit or an unwelcomed invite. And that was a time that our daughter was almost taken away from us by her very own grandmother. Next story. I know this title sounds bad, but please hear me out. I'm embarrassed to be posting this, but I need your opinions. Last year, my sister, 35F, found out her husband, 38M, was cheating with our cousin, 40F. He was tossed out of the house, and she filed for divorce within 3 days of finding out. She went and told everyone too. We gave her as much financial and emotional support as we could. Our cousin's husband tossed her out too, and no one in our family would take her in. Her kids have not spoken to her since this all went down. To our shock and horror, 2 months after my sister filed, she decided to reconcile with her post-husband. On top of that, she insisted that we support her decision. We were especially appalled when she expected him to be invited for Christmas. I was hosting and flat out told her that she might have lost her mind, but I still had mine, and her post-husband would never be welcomed at my house ever again. The rest of the family took the same stance. She told us she would not be coming for Christmas. I told her I would miss her. I guess that was not her hill to die on because she showed up with her kids to celebrate and left her husband at home by himself. We have a milestone birthday coming up for our grandma, which is being held at my brother's house. The whole family will be there except for our cousin and sister's husband. Sister asked if there would ever come a time when her husband would be invited to family events again. I said our cousin would be invited back before her husband ever would. She is very upset over this and says she needs our support and says her husband is still part of the family. I told her he is not and will not change our minds. She got so angry that we would invite her cousin over her husband, who she hates with every fiber of her being. She called me and our brother an a-hole. I told her to think about our cousin's children. They don't want to be around her post-husband. We have to protect them as well. She left crying and said we made her life so much harder and she feels so alone. I told her she made a choice, but the rest of us refused to enable her bad choices. My best friend told me I'm not very sympathetic to my sister and should consider letting the post attend if cousin's kids were not around. Am I the a-hole for wanting to invite our cousin to a family event before inviting my brother-in-law? Not the a-hole. Her husband is not blood, so has less right to be in family functions than the cheating cousin does. Cousin crossed the line betraying family members, so only gets an invite if the wrong parties are agreeable. Sister might have forgiven her husband, but the rest of the family haven't. They cannot expect acceptance for him when she won't give hers for cousin. Not the a-hole. I'm sorry your sister wasn't strong enough to walk away from her toxic husband. She can't expect you guys to forgive and forget the irreparable damage that's been caused to your family. She needs to accept that this is her new reality and that she is choosing. Your niece and nephew shouldn't be forced to be around the guy that broke up their family. It would be hypocritical to invite the husband over your cousin who is actually family. If she demands forgiveness for her husband, then she needs to also forgive your cousin. I hope your sister comes to her senses and realizes she deserves happiness and is worthy of a loving partner. Not the a-hole. When a bomb like this is dropped, you can't just put the info back into the box and pretend like it never happened. This is also what happens when people trash their ex in the moment then get back with them. It's entirely her right, but don't expect everyone else to do a 180 and go right back to being cool. This is messier since it's all in family, so to speak. But sis needs to realize that no matter what lies she's telling herself, a lot of trust was broken and it won't be a quick and easy recovery. Here is the next story. Context. Last year I was in an accident that left me unable to fully use my legs. I can walk alright, but I've had to give up most of my favorite physical activities in the process. I can no longer do anything that requires jumping, running, or squats. My husband and I have a pretty shared friend group. In the last few months, they all have gotten into running, my husband included. They all loved it. It's all they post about on social media. They will go weekly together. They're comparing running gear. It's become all they talk about recently. Whenever we're all together, at least some of the conversation will be dedicated to their running. I've obviously never been invited because they know I physically can't participate. My bitterness about my disability was getting worse as they've gotten more passionate. Last night we were out at the bar with them and again the conversation turned to running. I went silent and just focused on my beer and pretty much disengaged from the conversation after that. My husband noticed I was upset and tried to change the subject, but the conversation continued. Finally, the evening ended and we got in the car, and I snapped at my husband and told him I don't give a shiz about his running and don't want to hear him or my friends talk about it around me anymore. He honestly took it pretty well and apologized, saying that he understood that I was upset and tried to change the conversation when it started up, but everyone else kept persisting. Regardless of his apology, I feel like an a-hole because I want him and my friends to have hobbies they enjoy, and just because I can't participate doesn't mean they shouldn't be able to be enthusiastic about them with me. ETA. I am in counseling for my injury accident already, so I'm seeking help mentally adjusting to my new lifestyle. ETA 2. Thank you for all your responses from you're the a-hole to no a-holes here to not the a-hole. I do really appreciate most of your comments, and I am reading and considering all of them. Could do without the private messages that wish my legs would get cut off by chainsaws though. I'm going with no assholes here. Your accident was not that long ago. In my opinion, people who go through trauma like this are allotted a window of leniency while they learn to adjust to their reality. You didn't snap in front of everyone. You snapped in private, and like you said, he took it well. The fact that you feel bad means you probably remember this, and maybe next time you'll opt for a reasonable conversation instead of snapping. Regardless, you're still learning to deal with a very harsh new reality that many people won't understand, including your husband. It certainly sounds like he's supportive and worked with you, even with you snapping. Sounds like a patient guy. Best of luck to you. Not the a-hole. It's rude for your friends to persist in a topic of conversation that excludes you when you're socializing together. It wouldn't be wrong for you or your husband to say to the group, "Hey friends, we are completely leaving last sleep out of the conversation. Can we take a second to remember what we have in common? Last sleep is part of our activity this evening and would like to be included." I mean, this is basic Miss Manners type stuff. People sniff at manners as old-fashioned, but at bottom, they're all about helping people get along and maintain relationships through a lot of what life dishes out. The sad thing is that these friends may not understand or care. You may need to ask your husband to support you in finding new friends, and he may need to step away from this lot in order to get out there and form new shared friendships with you.